everyone. Welcome to Inspirational Instructors. My name is Dr. Ipek and I'm an instructor at University of South Florida. Today we are here with a truly inspirational instructor, Professor Kaw. Dr. Kaw is a professor of mechanical engineering at University of South Florida. Funded by National Science Foundation, under Dr. Kaw's leadership, he and his colleagues have developed, implemented, refined, and assessed online resources for an open courseware in Numerical Methods. This courseware receives annually over 1 million page views and over 1,800,000 views of YouTube lectures. Dr. Kaw has received several national, regional, and university awards, including the 2012 U.S. Professor of the Year award. Welcome, Professor Kaw, and thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thank you, Beck, for inviting me to talking to you about inspirational instructors. I'm hoping that whatever I have to say helps people to maybe get inspired a little bit. I don't know how much. Also, thank you for introducing me with such kind words. Reminds me of an instance where Lyndon Johnson was introduced, and what he said in his speech was that if my mother were here, she would have believed everything which was said in his introduction. But if my father was here, he would have said, "Who the heck are they talking about?"
Dr. Kaw, could you very please tell us briefly about your ongoing research in education?
Yes, so far as the current research I'm doing in education is concerned, it is dealing with mostly with flipped classes. So what we are trying to do is that we are already finding out that flipped classes are surely better than the traditional classes, maybe as good as the blended classes, but there are still some intangible things. So even if we are finding that the flipped classes are as good as the blended classes, there are some intangible things which we don't get as much in a blended class. Like, for example, making students responsible for some learning before they come to class, because when they go and get a job, they will have to do that in real life. So, having said that, what we found out is that the flipped classes were as good as the blended classes, or we could not differentiate between the two so far as the student performance is concerned, or so far as the student satisfaction is concerned with such modalities. What we found out is the weakest link in the flipped classroom was the pre-class learning. So this is the learning which students have to do before they come to class so that they can participate in the class, whether you are using clicker questions, whether using techniques such as think, peer, and share, or whether you are just asking them to write a 1-minute paper, such active learning strategies. So what we found out in an exploratory study in the last 3 years or so was that if you do the pre-class learning through adaptive learning, then the students are doing much better in the classroom itself, and also their performance is also increasing, and the student satisfaction is also increasing. So having said that, we now have a full-fledged grant. So this was an exploratory grant which we had. So we have a full-fledged grant where we are developing these adaptive lessons for the whole course of the course which I teach is called Numerical Methods. It's an engineering class. And then we are also implementing it at two other universities, Alabama A&M and Arizona State University. And all the data which we'll be collecting will be sent to University of Pittsburgh for them to look at how well our students are doing in the flipped classroom without adaptive learning and the flipped classroom with adaptive learning. There's also another part of it which another instructor at USF is helping me with, is to be able to identify the students who are at risk, and also to be able to identify the students who should be helped. And we are using predictive analytics for doing that. So it's not a question of seeing that whether somebody has turned in a homework or not, but to see that how they are interacting with adaptive lessons themselves, to see that where we should spend our time and effort and cost of doing an intervention with such students. So that's also a very significant part of the research which we are doing right now.
What is your view on current status and future of undergraduate education? Is there any area that needs improvement?
My view on the current status of undergraduate education is optimistic, especially we've gone through a pandemic and it has really made all the parties, whether it's the instructors, whether it's the department chairs or the administration, to put their resources into undergraduate education and see how it can be done online, right? But at the same time, because we had to do it online, we had to have a focused thinking of how to go about doing it, as opposed to some may have taken an approach, hey, I just go to class and teach whatever is in front of me. But now with online, one has to deliberately think about what they're going to do in each class. So I'm very optimistic that the changes which the pandemic has brought in will continue after the pandemic is over, and it will keep on improving undergraduate education, mostly in the face-to-face classes as well. There are some challenges to undergraduate education, and mostly you face these in research universities, where the teaching part may not be rewarded as much as the research. So something has to give if people are too keen on improving the research productivity, teaching productivity will decrease. So I'm concerned about that part, but maybe not to that extent as many people would like you to think. I hope that that changes with time.
Dr. Kaw, what is your motivation in your devotion to improve education?
My motivation in improving education is because it is considered to be a way to get to the next level, whether it's the way we are thinking about life, about becoming a good citizen, or if it is to increase your social mobility. So, as has been shown, that a college graduate earns about $1 million more than a high school graduate in their lifetime, and that can be a big social mobility motivation for many of our students. Students who are low income students, students are first generation students. So, in that way, I see that if a person or student is seeking an opportunity uh, and to get educated especially in a STEM field where you are guaranteed that even if you're an average engineer or an average scientist, you will become socially upward mobile. So I'm hoping that what that does is that improves our society as a whole.
What is flipped classroom model and what are the advantages of flipped learning?
So you're asking me the question about what is flipped learning. Many times, what people talk about flipped learning, they will say, "Oh, done in class is done at home. What is done at home is done in class," uh, which is not a bad way to get started about what flipped learning is. But why are we doing it? That's what's important. So if we understand why we are doing flipped classes, only then we can get to the true definition of flipped learning. So let's suppose if I'm teaching in the class and I am giving a lecture with hardly any interaction between the students and myself, let's say, there's no need for that to take place in the classroom because it could be substituted by something what is interactive because I'm an expert, my students are novices, at least in the beginning, and we're trying to improve their skill level. So why not take that part, which is to simply lecture, take it home where students can see it at their own pace. They get tested also on the introductory knowledge to a particular topic. So they're becoming responsible for learning themselves, which they will have to do eventually when they go out and work out there. They will have to self-learn new things which are presented to them in their place of employment, or whether they are working for themselves also. So they in the home, what they are doing is they are looking at these lectures, studying them, answering some questions so as to be able to assess whether they understand those. But when they come in the classroom, now what that most of that classroom time can be dedicated to checking whether they have the low level knowledge first, and then also some of the upper level knowledge as well. Like you might give them a couple of free response questions where you might ask them to do it by themselves, and then get into a group and exchange ideas about a particular question which some of them might have found difficult or may not know how to get started. And the instructor is there also to help them to guide through those free response questions if they are unable to think about it. Uh, what the instructor is basically doing is not necessarily being the guide on the side, but he's being intentional about it. That, hey, I want to help the students in overcoming the obstacles they might be facing for the higher level learning. And I also found out that some people think that once they come to class, since they did what they were supposed to do at home, they were supposed to look at the lectures, then they came to class, they did the problems, that's it. No, you cannot do very higher level thinking in the classroom itself. You have to then give some more problems to them to do at home, which are higher level thinking, where they have to maybe evaluate something, or whether they have to synthesize information from various chapters or various courses. And that can come also in form of projects and so on and so forth. So that's what the flipped learning model is. And why is it advantageous? We are finding out that we're not finding a big difference between, so far as the knowledge, the conceptual knowledge and the procedural knowledge they are getting between flipped and blended classes. But we are surely seeing that there is a big improvement in increasing the confidence of the students to be able to learn on their own. So then it, of course, translates into lifelong learning skills. Also, the metacognitive skills also improve, which means that since they have to think themselves about, they have to think for themselves, it also improves their thinking about thinking, that they are able to question, why am I thinking in a certain way? What steps did I take to think about this particular problem, do this problem correctly? So they're taking a step back from just being in a routine and trying to solve a problem, and they are questioning themselves why they are doing it a certain way.
Attention plays a very important role in student success, and instructors are having difficulty sustaining the attention of students in a classroom. And how can we enhance attention in a classroom?
Of course, getting the attention of students is much more difficult in today's climate. You're right about that. Because I tell my students that if you're looking at your cell phone, I cannot be more entertaining than that cell phone. Because looking at a Facebook page or some funny joke or something like that, uh, that has a lot more immediate gratification than me talking about how to solve a nonlinear equation. I find this quite often. People say, "Oh, you got to be more entertaining, or you got to be more attention grabbing than what's on the cell phone." I don't think we can compete against that, guys. That's almost like a cop out, that we are saying that, hey, we got to do better than the Facebook page or than a Twitter page or a Snapchat page or a TikTok page. It's impossible to do. I myself would, if I didn't have to be at a certain place, I would prefer to see a movie, or maybe prefer to see a TV show than learn something, let's suppose. unless and until I'm self-motivated to do that. So in order to grab attention, what you can do is you can alleviate the situation about how much people are getting bored or something like that. So that's why I would talk about these getting attention back to the class. So if you find out that how attention wanes through a class period, it will be at the peak in the beginning, and then it'll start going down. Then what you can do is you can do some active learning exercises and bring the attention back up. And then again, when it wanes, you bring another active learning exercise and bring it back up. So you are getting people involved in how the system is working. So what that does is that basically will keep their attention, but not at the level as maybe a TV program or a football game going on. But surely these are some techniques which you can surely use. And these active learning exercises which one is doing, they don't have to be time consuming in terms of an instructor's effort to come up with them. They can be a simple homework problem which you might be giving. You might be asking them a few clicker questions, and nowadays making clicker questions is very easy online. It's free of charge, like using Microsoft Forms, for example. You can ask them to write a 1 minute paper. You can ask them to discuss what we just discussed or what we discussed in the last class with the fellow student. So it's not very time consuming to do that.
I noticed in my classes a significant portion of student population is interested in grades more than in learning. And how can we motivate students towards learning?
I get this quite a bit, saying that hey, students are only interested in grades but not in learning. This might be true. So who knows that because the student is young, so he has 4 or 5 classes he's taking. Especially our type of students, or the students we get, they are working also outside for a few hours, maybe 10 to 20 hours per week. They would optimize their time just like we do. So if it is just to get a grade, they will work towards the grade. So this is where the obligation of the instructor comes in. You align the assessments which you are giving for a grade to the objectives of the course. And you're good. So even if the main focus of a student is to get a good grade, but if those grades, what you are giving, so far as evaluating those grades or coming up with those grades is concerned, is aligned with what you want them to know at the end of the course, it's done. I'll give you an example. There used to be a professor in our college who said, "Hey, I'm teaching this thermodynamics course, and these guys don't even know what enthalpy is by the end of the course." And I asked him, do you ask them to define enthalpy in a test? He said, no, I only give problems. That's what you're supposed to do in a test. This was 20, 30 years ago. That's not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to give them problems so that they can see that whether they can do a problem which has been assigned to them. I said, no, why don't you try one thing? Why don't you go ahead and ask them what the definition of enthalpy is when you first introduce it, and ask them again in the final exam. I can guarantee you that the word will get out that, hey, you're not simply only asking problems at the end of the chapter or problems which you're coming up with, but you're also asking short questions, conceptual questions, definitions, and so on and so forth. People will study accordingly. You will meet the objectives which you are placing on yourself and on them.
What are some challenges currently instructors have to face in undergraduate education, including online education challenges? And could you very please tell us what are your ideas on how to overcome them?
So you're talking about some of the online challenges which we're facing in the pandemic world. Yeah, many of us never had taught an online class, and so we had to figure out how we're going to teach the online class. And many of us took the approach that, hey, whatever I'm doing face to face, if I duplicate it in the online environment, and then I'll be able to be successful. But sadly, that does not turn out to be the case. So you can still translate some of the things to the online environment, like you can have lectures, you can ask people to do the presentations, things like that. But what you have to think about is that you have to take each class as a project. You have to see that, hey, okay, if I'm going to be teaching in this week, what should I do to accomplish the objectives of that particular week? And you have to break it down. You have to break it down in terms of what they should do before the class, what you and them should be doing in the class, and what they should be doing outside of the class. You have to think about assessments. So just a simple thing. You might be giving only two midterms and a final exam in a face-to-face class. That may be all and good in a face-to-face environment, but in an online environment, you better give several tests, maybe three, four, five of them, so that the stakes are low, and so your students are not tempted to maybe have some academic integrity issues. They stay honest. They also know that, hey, even if I do badly on one test, I can surely make it up in another test. So low stakes tests works very, very well. And also you have to give them to do things regularly. So there should be a lot of space practice, a lot of opportunities of space practice. And these, some of them can be graded, some of them can be ungraded. But if you give a lot of space practicing, you'll find out that students are going to do well. And then, of course, as I mentioned, that maybe teaching the class in a blended or flipped fashion might be better. So you don't necessarily have to lecture for 75 minutes in an online environment, showing one PowerPoint presentation after another. You could break it down again, these active learning exercises, and have clicker questions. Maybe ask a question after so many minutes, and they could be answering in the chat session of the online class, or maybe they can go into breakout rooms. So all these can be experimented based on what you think you can do yourself, and also what will be most beneficial for the students.
Dr. Kaw, what are some characteristics of great instructors?
So the question is, what are the characteristics of a good instructor? The first characteristic which I will tell you for good instructor is that they are not born that way. As much as we might think about Lady Gaga that was born that way, but I don't think instructors are born that way. It bothers me when if somebody thinks that I'm a good instructor, that's a big if, and they say, Dr. Kaw, it must become naturally to you. No, it doesn't come naturally to me. Just like anything, if you want to become a good track star, you got to work very hard. You got to work long hours. You got to practice. Same thing with good teaching. It all comes with good, deliberate, intentional practice, not just trying to make good PowerPoint presentations or writing a book or making notes look nice. That's not what good teaching is. What I found out was that there are several traits which you'll find in a good teacher. One of them is that they are very organized. Whether it is when they are teaching a class, they don't fumble in terms of finding the notes and trying to figure out what problem they have to do next. And that builds confidence in our students, saying that, hey, he's very organized or she's very organized, so I got to be organized too. Maybe this is a good skill. If I admire that skill in an instructor, then maybe this is a good skill to have. The second one is that you have to care about your students. You don't have to be a therapist to the students, because we're not even qualified to be a therapist. And even if we were psychology professors, we wouldn't want to be therapists. But to know that, hey, we're all human beings, and so we have to care in a certain way that we show that, hey, they're not just numbers, they're not just student number 99 in a class of 200. And those we can do by doing simple things. So we can ask them to introduce themselves. When we have a face-to-face class, we can come 15 minutes early to the class. We can leave maybe 5 minutes after the class is over. Have generous office hours. And many times in the office hours, just ask students what their aspirations are, what their background is, and why they chose engineering, for example. Those things make a big difference. So I think being organized is important, and having a human connection with the students is extremely important. There are other traits which people might say, oh, knowing the content. They may also say that they need to engage students with each other. Yeah, of course, those all are there. But what I find out is that once you keep these two things in mind, that you have to be organized about everything, whether it is teaching the class, whether it is making tests, whether it is giving tests back in a reasonable amount of time, because immediate feedback is very important. The other one is the student connection. If you just keep those two things in the center, you'll find out that all the other traits which people might talk about, they all fall under these two categories.
Thank you, Professor Kaw, for being with us here today and being an inspiration to all instructors.
Thank you, Peck, for inviting me for this session here. I'm glad that we had this talk. I'm hoping that some of the things which I mentioned can be categorically put in the classroom, and it will help a few people here and there to become a better instructor and improve the experience which the faculty members have with the students, and vice versa, where the students have a good experience with a particular instructor. Thank you again for inviting me. Hope everything goes on well with all of us in this pandemic year. Thank you.
We will see you guys in the next episode.